An unknown voice states they know the name all too well. Cecil appears trapped within a glowing, faceted crystal, clutching his head in distress. Cecil screams in intense rage, his eyes glowing as he wields a luminous sword, shattering the crystalline prison around him into fragments. Cecil's reflection appears in shattered glass shards, his eyes glowing as he smiles sinisterly while holding a white flower. Cecil Perdium sits casually on an ornate, high-backed chair, illuminated by a single spotlight within a damaged room. The strongest knight in the north questions how this could be happening to him. Cecil glares with wide, furious eyes, his face bloodied as he gasps for breath, enraged at the prospect of losing. Cecil stands over a kneeling Elena on a battlefield engulfed in flames. Elena is bloodied and defeated, surrounded by the bodies of fallen soldiers. He taunts her about the expensive trap he prepared and shouts the word flare. Cecil stands in a desolate landscape engulfed by flames, clad in heavy armor with his face obscured by a helmet as he wields a massive, blood-stained axe. Cecil reveals himself in a flash, cloaked in dark armor, a single purple eye glowing with power from beneath his hood as fiery yellow energy surrounds him. The injured man, his face bloodied and contorted with rage, grits his teeth and breathes heavily while furiously demanding to know if Cecil Perdium knew of his plan and set a trap. Cecil stands battered on a field of fallen soldiers, gripping his bloody sword as a hooded figure looms over him with a large axe. A large army of armored soldiers stands in formation on a dusty, illuminated battlefield, holding various weapons and shields. A cloaked figure gestures toward three others in a dark forest, speaking about their spies. Matryoshka dolls lie scattered and disassembled across a wooden surface, with one partially assembled to reveal a face among the broken pieces. A colossal dark hand grips the injured Cecil, its giant glowing blue eyes staring down at him from a blood-red void as it declares, "I knew all about it." Cecil stands severely injured, trembling in absolute shock as he realizes his secret plan has been discovered. Cecil screams in defiance, his words cut off as an armored boot violently kicks him in the face. Cecil stands over his bloodied adversary, gripping his massive, blood-stained axe before bringing it down. A Dark Knight's helmet crashes onto the ground amidst fiery energy and debris as a defiant voice vows to win every future war. Cecil smirks confidently as explosions and smoke erupt behind him, and he explains that it's because he has a plan. 1 year ago, a military encampment spread across a grassy field near the Perdium territory in the Kingdom of Luthania, with numerous tents and armored soldiers scattered before distant mountains. Cecil breathes heavily as a hand touches his midsection, and he questions what is happening. Cecil sits up abruptly in bed, gasping for air with wide, shocked eyes. Cecil's blue eyes widen in disbelief, his jaw clenching as sweat beads on his forehead. A colossal sword falls from the sky, striking the ground near two battling figures while a large castle stands in the distance. Cecil scowls, blood pouring from a critical wound in their chest and splattering across their face and hair. Cecil is struck with a violent impact, sending streaks of blood flying around him as his eyes glow and his face contorts in agony. Cecil stands in his golden armor over a heavily wounded opponent on a desolate, blood-splattered battlefield as the defeated man collapses to the ground. The red-haired knight Aiden, wearing blood-stained golden armor, smiles grimly and declares the war is over, identifying himself as one of the 7 strongest men on the continent. Cecil kneels defeated on the blood-stained battlefield as a victorious warrior stands over him with a sword. The warrior asks for any last words as his helmet's visor clacks shut. Cecil states he has none, his only regret being his failure to see his revenge through. Cecil glares defiantly upwards, his face severely bloodied and injured. He breathes heavily, daring his opponent to kill him while declaring his full name and title as Cecil Perdium, the Mercenary King. Cecil smirks mockingly, his face bloodied but determined, as he calls his opponent an arrogant fool. Cecil stands over the injured Elena, who cowers on the debris-covered ground. He identifies her as the successor of the fallen House Perdium and states he heard she left home after her sister's death. Cecil glares upward with an injured, blood-splattered face, his expression a mix of shock and defiance as he demands to know how someone from a different kingdom could have that information. Cecil extends her bloodied, gloved hand across the desolate landscape, screaming that she once searched everywhere for him. Cecil smirks, revealing she and Duke Delphine joined forces with the goal of destroying his family. Cecil stares in furious shock, his face spattered with blood as his eyes glow with an intense white and purple light. He shouts the word, W.E. Cecil kneels in a pool of blood, gravely injured and surrounded by shadowy figures with glowing eyes, and she realizes someone else besides the Duke was responsible for House Perdium's downfall. Cecil stands over his bloodied and trembling opponent. He raises his glowing, blood-stained sword, poised to deliver the final blow. Cecil, covered in blood with his eyes glowing blue, screams in extreme rage with his mouth wide open. Cecil stares from the shadows, his gaze intense as one of his eyes glows with a bright blue light. Cecil, in his golden armor, swings his bloodstained sword at a shadowy winged figure, his red hair and blue cape flowing through the fiery chaos. Cecil emerges from a barrel of glowing blue liquid, his face sweaty and shocked as he clutches his neck, recalling he was beheaded and died but is somehow alive with his head still intact. Cecil stares into his reflection in a water-filled barrel and touches his face, questioning if it was all a delusion as he realizes he looks much younger. Cecil cautiously surveys the rustic tent, his eyes scanning over nearby barrels and a sword. He seethes with anger, believing he has been captured by arrogant mages to be used as a lab rat and vowing to make them regret letting him live. Cecil looks down, his brow furrowed in shock. Ricardo, a soldier of House Perdium in light armor, pulls back a tent flap and looks inside with a concerned expression. Cecil places a finger to his lips, his expression intense as he unsheathes his sword. A dark-haired individual holds Cecil from behind, pressing a sword to his throat and promising to let him live if he answers his questions. Cecil's purple eye narrows and flashes with light. Cecil flinches, his eyes widening in alarm as sweat breaks out across his face. A blonde-haired man grabs Cecil from behind, pressing a sword against his throat as Cecil panics in his hold. Cecil stares in distress as a sword is held to his face, questioning what the other person is saying. Cecil aggressively shoves the blonde swordsman, accusing him of falling asleep after throwing a tantrum. Cecil grips his throat, his hair messy and sweat covering his face as he speaks with a distressed expression, reminding someone that they insisted on leading the charge against the orcs. Cecil stares in shock, his eyes wide as sweat beads on his face. Cecil stands holding his sword, angrily denying that he threw a tantrum. He tells the other man to grab his things and declares he will wait outside. Cecil looks to the side with a furrowed brow, a bead of sweat on his temple as he asks about his things and their destination. Cecil, wearing armor and carrying a sword, declares they will return to the Perdium territory, causing Elena to flinch. Cecil's purple eye widens in shock, his brow furrowing as he looks sharply to the side. Cecil grabs the brown-haired man by the collar, yelling in his face as the man recoils in shock. Cecil's face contorts with shock and distress as he confronts them about Perdium, demanding to know if they mean his family's ruined territory. Cecil stands on a rocky outcrop, overlooking a sprawling village and a grand castle in the distance. Cecil surveys the ruined landscape of the Perdium territory, looking at a tattered flag as she questions why the area seems fine when she saw it burn to the ground with her own eyes. Cecil leans in and whispers urgently to the young master, questioning if he had a nightmare and warning him not to speak of their territory being ruined, reminding him his father would disown him for such words. Cecil pulls hard on his own cheek, his face contorting in pain as he questions if he is dreaming. Cecil flicks his own cheek, wincing from the pain to confirm he is not dreaming while a brown-haired man watches him with a concerned expression. Cecil stares into two floating crystal shards, one reflecting his younger face and the other showing his thriving, intact territory, leading him to a sudden realization. Cecil stands wide-eyed with his hands raised before a glowing, intricate clock mechanism, realizing he has returned to the past. Cecil looks frustrated and pained as he recalls his childhood resentment toward his poor family. Cecil lies sprawled on the floor in distress while his family members stand with their backs turned, completely ignoring him. He recalls how his immature behavior and sense of inferiority led to unfortunate incidents, causing everyone in his family to avoid him over time. Cecil reels backward through a dark space, collapsing onto a gridded floor. Cecil stands atop a mound of defeated soldiers, a mercenary who built his skills and reputation by surviving countless battles. Cecil arrives in Perdium and collapses to his knees amidst the fiery ruins of the city, a tattered wolf flag lying on the ground beside him. A tattered flag with a wolf emblem stands among the fiery wreckage of a destroyed battlefield. Cecil stands in the camp and looks up at a large flag with a white wolf emblem as it flaps in the wind. Cecil looks upwards with a gentle, appreciative smile, his expression full of warmth for his people. Cecil thinks about how ludicrous his return to the past is, snickering to himself and feeling the urge to sing while a stern armored man observes him amidst soldiers in tents. Cecil glares forward, his eye narrowed with intense determination despite the lines of strain on his face. Cecil stands pensively beside a stern, brown-haired man in light armor, recalling how he was told they were there to fight orcs and thinking he could never forget this day. Bloodied soldiers lie dead and critically injured across the battlefield, surrounded by discarded swords. 3 large, muscular red orcs stand together wielding various melee weapons as 2 of them sneer. Cecil reflects on his stubborn leadership, a mistake that resulted in his forces being nearly wiped out by an unexpected horde of over 24 red orcs. Cecil walks through the military encampment with another man. He thinks about how the orcs lacked a specific strategy, believing they can win if preparations begin immediately. He worries that no one will listen to him because they perceive him as a spoiled brat. Cecil stands with glowing eyes, gripping his sword as a massive wooden structure collapses violently behind him. Cecil slams his hand into the ground, causing a burst of debris to explode outwards. The armored soldiers look on with terrified expressions as one of them screams, "ORCS." Orcs with glowing red eyes attack armored soldiers, who fight back with spears and axes in a chaotic battle. Cecil stares in shock, his eyes wide with alarm as sweat breaks out on his face, completely stunned by the speed of the enemy's charge. The massive red-skinned monster swings its large weapon, brutally attacking and slaughtering the armored human soldiers across the battlefield. Cecil screams the command to get back in formation. Skovan, the expedition commander, rushes forward with 2 swords drawn, shouting for his troops to stay calm and get into a defensive formation. Cecil slams his sword down on the large red-skinned monster, the force of the blow launching smaller figures into the air. Cecil grits his teeth and sweats, panicking as he realizes his unprepared party has been ambushed by a much larger orc force than expected, facing imminent annihilation. Cecil's eyes are wide with alarm, sweat breaking out on his face as he shouts for the commander in a panic. Cecil turns, caught by surprise, as a large, red-skinned monster lunges at him from behind with an axe, roaring as a warning is shouted too late. Cecil leaps from the rocky cliff, grappling with a red-skinned creature as the ground shatters beneath them. Cecil intensely grabs the other person's shoulder. Cecil and his companion leap backward, evading the massive axe swung by a towering red monster. An older man with a mustache and goatee stares with wide, confused eyes, sweat dripping down his face. Cecil swings his glowing sword, clashing weapons with a large, red-skinned monster. Cecil's bloodied hand maintains a firm grip on his sword's hilt, the weapon itself also spattered with blood. Cecil swings his glowing sword, and the large, red-horned monster explodes into bloody pieces. 3 soldiers stand frozen, their eyes wide and mouths agape in abject horror at the scene before them. The red-skinned monster roars in agony as a massive, bloody wound tears open across its body. Cecil stands firm amidst debris and blood splatter as a colossal, bandaged foot crashes down from above. Cecil swings his sword, the blade glowing with a purple energy trail as a large red figure looms in the background. He thinks in frustration that he cannot use mana yet, wishing he had been sent back to an even earlier point in time. Cecil holds his sword and steps over a defeated body while a knight in blue armor kneels on the ground, looking up and identifying him as the commander. Cecil extends his hand, palm facing up, and commands them to raise and hand it over. Cecil stares in bewilderment from inside his full-plate armor, his eyes wide as he watches a hand reach towards him and asks, "Pardon?" Cecil extends his hand with an intense expression, demanding the right of command. Cecil stands over the defeated, kneeling knight with his sword in one hand. He extends his other hand and demands the right of command. A grizzled man glares with intense frustration, sweat beading on his forehead as he questions the ridiculousness of someone claiming the right of command while his soldiers are dying. The swordsman shouts in disbelief, but Cecil turns his back on him and utters a single command to rise. An armored man turns his back and walks away from Cecil across the desolate landscape, declaring he cannot hand over the right of command granted by his lord. He states this refusal applies even to Master Cecil, who stands alone holding his sword. Cecil's face tightens with frustration as he clenches his jaw, internally acknowledging the situation is no good and admitting he would react the same way if a spoiled brat suddenly demanded command. A giant, red-skinned monster raises a massive axe and roars at Cecil and Elena, who stand ready for battle. Cecil, the knight in blue armor, steps forward and aggressively takes charge from the younger swordsman. He yells for the swordsman to fall back, declaring he does not have enough experience to lead the soldiers. Cecil's eyes glow blue as he swiftly draws his sword in a single fluid motion. Cecil punches the armored man directly in the face, sending him reeling backward from the impact. Cecil forcefully grabs the blonde-haired man by the collar and yells at him. Cecil screams in agony, his face contorted in shock as he is stabbed. Cecil stares in confusion, his eyes wide and sweat beading on his forehead. Cecil kneels beneath the red-skinned monster, his sword driven straight up through its head as the creature screams in agony. The blood-soaked monster roars as blood spurts from its face. Cecil stands over the dead monster, his sword plunged through its head as a companion stands beside him over the bloodied corpse. Cecil stares to the side with wide, shocked eyes, sweating in utter disbelief at how the orc's vitals were just struck. Cecil stands with his back turned to a surprised Skovan, asking him what he believes is the most important thing in a battle. Monstrous, red-skinned creatures with glowing eyes roar at a group of soldiers, who tremble in place. Cecil grins as he declares that no one can win a fight by cowering in fear, insisting they need a fighter's spirit. Cecil leaps forward with glowing red eyes, slashing his curved blades at the bleeding red demon as an armored figure stands ready in the background. Cecil raises his glowing sword overhead, preparing to strike the multitude of red monsters and armored enemies surrounding him amidst the scattered debris. Cecil, his eyes glowing red, thrusts his blade into a large, monstrous creature, causing it to bleed profusely as nearby soldiers look on in shock and fear. Cecil stares forward, his eyes wide with distress as sweat covers his face. Cecil, covered in blood with a determined expression, defiantly raises his gore-splattered sword and shouts his challenge. Cecil stands bloodied on the corpse of a defeated red monster, raising his sword high. He screams that he will kill them all as two more monsters loom in the background. Cecil leaps into the air, vaulting over the surrounding purple monsters to deliver a powerful downward sword strike. Cecil slashes through multiple large, pink-skinned monsters with his sword. Cecil stares in horrified disbelief as a bloodied, monstrous claw tears through his armor and impales his side, another appendage poised to strike from above. Cecil, bloodied but focused, swiftly cleaves through a large monster with his glowing blade. Cecil hunches over, spattered with blood and panting heavily from exhaustion. Someone has an objection. Cecil dodges the monster's slam attack with minimal movement, the impact cracking the ground where he just stood. Bloodied Cecil delivers a single, precise slash to the large monster's chest, striking its vitals. Cecil stands determined, wielding a glowing, blood-stained sword as a shadowy, masked figure emanates dark energy behind him. Cecil stares wide-eyed, his expression frozen in profound shock and fear. Cecil, his face bloodied and scratched, shouts through the explosions that he is just getting warmed up. Cecil charges forward, dodging the heavy weapons of multiple large, red-skinned warriors as he shouts at them to try harder, questioning if they can even call themselves a warrior tribe. Two armored men shout in alarm as they see their enemies converge on the young master, watching in disbelief as he stands his ground instead of fleeing. Cecil and Elena, armored and distressed, call out for their commander as he walks away from them into a blinding light. An older man sweats profusely, his face a mask of shock and concern as he looks upon a field of fallen figures and questions what Master Cecil is planning. Cecil stands over a slain orc, his sword dripping with blood as a horde of other orcs surrounds and attacks him. Cecil runs across the fields, moving directly toward the edge of a cliff that overlooks a village and a distant castle. Cecil looks to the side, his eyes widening in startled realization as sweat beads on his face. Cecil's eyes widen in alarm, his face covered in sweat as he stares in complete shock. Cecil swings his sword down at the soldiers, one of whom shouts a command for everyone to raise their shields and brace for the attack. A man with a mustache sweats, his face stern as he looks away and swallows hard. Cecil evades multiple large, pink-skinned creatures as they attack him from above, raising his sword to confront them. A bloodied Cecil swings his glowing sword, delivering a powerful strike with a determined expression. Cecil deflects the constant attacks from the surrounding red-skinned monsters, but his body is weak and on the verge of collapsing. Cecil, covered in numerous cuts and splattered with blood, flashes a defiant grin. Three hulking figures armed with crude blades sprint across the desolate landscape, rushing past abandoned wagons. The red-tusked creature in the foreground whips its head around as a second one behind it also turns, both monsters looking startled by an unseen event. A barrage of glowing spears violently strikes the armored figures, piercing their bodies and knocking them off their feet. Cecil stands bloodied with severe injuries on his face and chest, grinning defiantly. Cecil leaps from the rugged cliff face, hurtling through the air toward two large red-skinned figures on the edge. Cecil floats in midair, bloodied and with a fierce expression, holding a glowing purple sword as he shouts, "Now." Cecil shouts an urgent command, his eyes wide and his face stern. Cecil commands her armored soldiers as they clash violently with large, pink-skinned creatures on a cliff's edge, ordering her troops to push the monsters over the side. Cecil engages multiple large, red-skinned monsters in close combat, pushing them back amidst the chaotic melee. Cecil screams, his face twisted in a furious expression of exertion, and the man behind him mirrors the raw yell. Cecil unleashes a powerful blow, sending the red-skinned enemies tumbling over the cliff's edge. Cecil dives into a horde of large, pink monsters, swiftly cutting through them as they roar and thrash around her in a chaotic battle. An explosion of blood and viscera erupts outward, tearing through the fleshy surface with immense force. Cecil, Elena, and Belinda stand exhausted, panting heavily after the battle. They show expressions of relief and triumph, having defeated all the orcs. Three armored guards struggle against a dark force rising from below, their faces showing extreme distress as one of them screams for Master Cecil. Bloodied Cecil tightly grips his large, blood-stained sword impaled in the rocky ground and looks up with a determined expression. Cecil, heavily injured and covered in blood, stares forward intensely with his blue eyes and forms a determined grin. Cecil stares in shock, his eyes wide as sweat beads on his forehead. An old man with bushy white eyebrows glares from the shadows, a confident smirk on his face. Elena hangs precariously from a cliff's edge, his hand gripping a bloody sword to keep from falling. Cecil leans over the precipice in his armor, reaching his hand down to save him. Cecil's hand slips from the hilt of his large sword, his grip failing. Cecil falls backward into a dark chasm with his arms outstretched, his body refusing to move. An armored man above reaches down desperately, unable to grab him. An older man's eyes widen in panic, sweat covering his face as two alarmed individuals stand behind him. Someone screams Master Cecil's name. An unknown voice calls out the name Cecil. Elena's face is obscured by shadow, her mouth falling open as she utters Cecil's name. Cecil stares forward with a worried expression, sweat trickling down his face as he calls out Elena's name. Two fragmented memories appear, one of Elena crying while embracing someone and another of her smiling serenely. In fragmented visions, Elena shouts, asking what is wrong with him and calling him the worst, while Belinda looks down with a sorrowful expression. Cecil stands in a dark void surrounded by glowing purple mist and shimmering particles, extending one hand slightly as he looks forward. Cecil holds a glowing, shard-like object in his hand, recognizing it contains his memories of Elena. Cecil jolts with a shocked expression as a hand from an unseen person grabs his shoulder. Elena grips the unseen person's arm, tears streaming down her face as she begs them to come with her. Cecil lies in bed with a compress on his forehead, his face slick with sweat and contorted in distress. Cecil lies in a bed inside a simple room, his body wrapped in bandages. Cecil lies in bed with a compress on his forehead, looking disoriented as he realizes he is alive and has been caught, and he attempts to raise his hand. Cecil sits up in bed with a cloth on his forehead, looking disoriented as he wakes. Cecil clutches his head, his face contorting in pain as red lightning-like energy spikes and pulses around his body. Cecil sits up in bed and clutches his stomach, his body aching from overexertion without mana. He internally acknowledges the pain is his own fault, but also notes that it makes him feel alive. Cecil jolts awake in bed, his eyes wide as he looks toward the doorway where Elena stands and calls out to him. Belinda holds a wooden bucket, her expression a mix of surprise and relief as she exclaims that the person is awake. Cecil stares forward, his eyes wide with shock as a bead of sweat forms on his face. He recognizes the person before him and quietly says Belinda's name. Belinda slams her hand on the wooden table, leaning forward with her eyes shut as she shouts in worried frustration. Belinda freezes as Cecil suddenly embraces her from behind, her eyes widening in surprise. Cecil suddenly embraces Belinda from behind, causing her to look up in surprise as she asks what has gotten into him and if he has done something wrong, but she quickly softens and admits she is just glad to see him. A younger Cecil stands holding a sword as Belinda kneels before him, comforting him inside a dilapidated room. Cecil explains the person went missing when the Perdium territory was destroyed, and she was never able to see them again, leaving only a single worn purple shoe on the cracked and desolate ground. Belinda embraces the white-haired woman, who smiles back reassuringly as Belinda thinks about how she never expected to be reunited with her. Cecil glares intensely while holding a person with white hair, his thoughts turning to how he should inform Belinda about the situation. Cecil grabs Belinda by the shoulders and urgently warns her that House Perdium is in danger, startling her as she demands to know how he has this information. Cecil swallows hard, hesitating as he begins to speak. Cecil speaks intensely, claiming he died and was resurrected, but a small, smiling Belinda interrupts him from below, sarcastically reminding him that he only nearly died at the hands of orcs. Cecil looks down, startled, as Belinda kneels on the floor pulling a bedsheet while assertively stating that he is the one in danger. A white-haired woman leans over and shouts at Cecil as he sits slumped in defeat, thinking to himself that she doesn't believe him and the situation is hopeless. Belinda chastises Cecil, worrying that an injury could have prevented him from attending the festival, and he flinches at her words. Cecil looks to the side, his blue eye revealing a focused and concerned expression as he thinks about the festival. Belinda stands in a room with bookshelves, touching her chin with a cunning expression as she asks if he has already forgotten about his plans with Lady Elena. A framed photograph on a wooden shelf shows a younger Cecil and Elena smiling and embracing on a chair. Cecil stands in a room filled with books and a sword, holding a framed photograph of two people. Cecil sits hunched on the floor of the dark, cluttered room, facing a window with a despondent posture. Cecil stands and talks to Belinda in a room, and she sits on the bed as he tells her an event is in about a week. Cecil turns his back and looks to the side, reflecting on the single week he has left. Elena, wearing a dark dress and ballet shoes, opens a wooden door to look into a room. She calls out for Cecil, remembering a specific day that changed her life. Cecil looks away with a pensive and pained expression, recalling the memory that has tortured him his whole life. Elena cries hysterically, clutching at someone's clothing and begging them to please come with her. Elena clutches her chest, her eyes wide with distress as a prophecy appears, stating that she will die in 1 week's time. Cecil embraces Elena from behind, and she looks surprised by the sudden contact. Belinda stares with wide red eyes, her face flushed in shock. Cecil suddenly wraps his arms around Elena from behind, causing her to jolt with wide eyes. She looks flustered and demands to know what he is doing, accusing him of pranking her again. Cecil looks down with an emotional expression as a hand embraces his face from below, and he says he missed them. Cecil forcefully shoves the man away as a white-haired woman restrains him, reacting with disgust and yelling for him to let go. Cecil hunches over, sweating and coughing. He stares in complete shock, unable to comprehend his opponent's immense strength. Cecil confronts the boy, gesturing angrily as she shouts that she only visited because Belinda asked her to. She furiously questions if he really thought she would forgive him so easily, then demands to know what he is even talking about. Cecil shouts, telling her to get out of his sight because even the sound of her breathing is annoying. The woman calmly reminds him that he once shouted the exact same thing at her. Cecil stares in disbelief, stammering as he asks if he really said that. Cecil rubs the back of his neck with an embarrassed smirk, apologizing for having been the worst brother ever in his past life. Elena and Belinda stare down at Cecil, their faces frozen in wide-eyed shock. They flinch back, confused and stunned by his sudden apology. Below them, Cecil looks up with an annoyed expression. Cecil shouts that he was the one who defeated the orcs, but he suddenly stops and clutches his chest as a red aura begins to pulse from his body. Cecil collapses to his knees, clutching his chest as the red aura around him intensifies with his pained gasp. Elena and Belinda smile widely as they look down at Cecil, who kneels on the floor clutching his stomach with a distressed expression. Cecil stares forward with a subtle, knowing smirk, thinking they're just the same as he remembers them. Cecil expresses deep regret as he recalls his past life, remembering a festival where he refused to go with Elena because a failed expedition had soured his mood. The memory shows Elena walking away from him alone as fireworks light up the night sky. Elena cries hysterically, clutching onto an unseen person's arm as she recalls this was the last time she saw her. Elena's corpse was found alongside her guard knights, slashed to pieces on the desolate ground. Cecil clutches the collar of his shirt, his expression pained with regret as particles scatter around him. Cecil kneels on the floor as two women stand behind him. A knock sounds at the door and a voice asks permission to enter. Guard knights Jamal and Philip block a stone archway, confronting an unseen Lady Elena. Two armored figures stand before Cecil and his companions, questioning why they did not wait outside as instructed before formally asking him to oversee supplies for the festival preparations. Cecil stares forward with a surprised and flustered expression, questioning why Elena would be in charge of the festival supplies. Belinda confronts Cecil, explaining he wouldn't know about Perdium's severe workforce shortage because he was always fooling around. She states his current labor is proof of their desperation, prompting a shocked Cecil to stammer and ask if that is really the case. Cecil, dressed in full armor, stands before a distressed Elena in a hallway. He tells her he should get going and that she needs to take care of herself. Cecil reflects internally that he never knew how bad things were for House Perdium, concluding he simply didn't care about such matters back then. Cecil stands with his hands in his pockets, looking down at the other character and offering to help. Elena looks to the side, her eyes wide and uneasy as a blush spreads across her cheeks. Elena and Belinda flinch, staring at Cecil with expressions of pure shock and disbelief. Belinda brings a hand to her mouth while Elena stands frozen, completely stunned by his words. The open-air market is filled with numerous stalls, vendors, and pedestrians walking through the crowded streets. Elena and Belinda recoil from an off-screen Cecil as other villagers flinch away in distress, telling him to go away and stop making them uncomfortable. Cecil physically restrains a struggling individual on the crowded street, holding them back while yelling at them to stay out of the situation as bystanders watch the commotion. Cecil clutches his face in distress, processing the grim details of Elena's death. Her corpse was discovered in the slums far from the festival grounds, which means she was either lured away or forcibly dragged there. A dark castle with tall towers stands under a stormy sky as a dirt path leads to its main gate, and the narrator declares his intention to go there to investigate the situation. Elena screams for Master Cecil to rush as a massive foot descends rapidly towards them. Cecil stares forward with wide, startled eyes, bringing a hand up to his face as a bead of sweat drips near his ear. Old Man Fergus stands hunched over and exhausted in his blue armor, wiping sweat from his brow in the town square. An armored knight seizes Cecil's shoulders in a public square, sobbing loudly about him being beaten by orcs. Cecil yells at the knight to stop bringing it up. An armored man holds Cecil, who looks embarrassed, as a woman smiles and asks for him to be taken back to his room. Cecil covers part of his face with his hand, his expression a mix of stress and resignation. Cecil asks Fergus if the castle has a training hall and demands he take her there, causing the surprised man to question her sudden request. Cecil stares ahead with a determined expression, answering that he wants to train. Cecil stares with wide, surprised eyes. A grand, multi-storied stone building with a prominent tower marks their arrival at a new location as a voice directs the young master forward. Cecil's blue eyes widen in shock as he stares forward. Cecil stands in a grand hall, staring at a circular tiered platform that emits a sound, shocked by its excellent condition. Cecil walks through the well-equipped training hall carrying a polearm, accompanied by a silent armored figure, and reflects that he never dreamed of such a fine facility when he was the mercenary king. Elena's head appears over a well-maintained armory, its stone walls lined with various weapons and shields. He explains that he kept the place in shape in case it was wished to be used one day. Cecil looks down with a resolute expression, convinced that the current situation is only temporary. Cecil looks over his shoulder with a wide, shocked eye at the kneeling armored figure, realizing with a jolt that the man might have been holding out hope for him in his past life too. Cecil lowers his gaze, a look of quiet understanding on his face. Cecil pats the older armored man on the shoulder, telling him to live a long life because dying is the worst. The man laughs and says Cecil speaks as though he has already lived a lifetime. Cecil smirks with a glint in his eye, revealing that he was brought back to life after being killed. Cecil stands in a castle corridor and dismisses the armored knight, telling him he is going to start training now. The knight bows deeply before him. Cecil stands in a stone hall, looking over his shoulder at a partially visible figure clad in dark armor. Elena and Belinda huddle with an older man, all three wearing sheepish and embarrassed expressions. Cecil stands with his back to the viewer, his hands in his pockets as he gazes into a bright, open space and questions the 1-week time frame. Cecil stands with his back turned, staring at a noble crest on the wall while recalling that another nobleman's son was blamed for Elena's death. A tattered black flag bearing a white wolf emblem stands amidst the wreckage of a battlefield under a dark, fiery sky, marking the final result of Perdium's territorial war. Cecil closes his eyes in deep contemplation, realizing that Elena's death is the trigger for his family's ruin as he considers his next move. Cecil's eyes snap open, glowing with a determined purple light as he resolves to act, a flash emanating from him. Cecil sits cross-legged on the stone floor of a training hall, thinking to himself that he needs to train his body but lacks the time to do so. Cecil grits her teeth and inhales deeply, determined to wield mana as faint purple energy emanates from her neck. Cecil sits cross-legged on a circular platform, meditating inside a grand stone room as glowing blue magical energy swirls around him. Cecil sits cross-legged on a battlefield surrounded by fallen knights and swords, meditating calmly as a potent red mana aura envelops him. Swirling lines of blue energy connect individual particles of mana floating in the air. Cecil's hands glow with blue-purple energy as he gathers the power between them, winding it into a condensed orb. Cecil meditates on the floor as blue energy swirls around him, forming a glowing mana core between his hands. Cecil's face strains with determination, sweat beading on his skin as a blue aura radiates from his body while he declares he would never have become one of the 7 strongest men on the continent if this were his limit. Cecil holds an old, reddish magic tome in his gloved, armored hand as it glows faintly, recalling how he found its first half in a past life and used it to inspire his own technique. Cecil strains and channels brilliant blue mana between his hands, coalescing it into a core. He forces a second core into existence with a crack of energy, then a third flashes into place. The combined mana erupts from his hands as a violent red discharge. Cecil screams while inverted, blue and red energy mixed with lightning bursting from his body. Cecil grimaces in pain, blood gushing from his mouth. Cecil sits hunched over on the floor, coughing from the strain of reaching his limit of 3, a number far less than the 5 he managed in his last life. Cecil's bloodied hand rests on the ground, the explosive technique having consumed an enormous amount of her mana. Cecil recalls her defeat, remembering how Aiden charged with his knights after she had depleted all her mana, and believing she would have won in a one-on-one fight. Cecil wipes blood from her mouth with the back of her hand, acknowledging the physical cost of her unstable technique. Cecil stands with his back turned inside a vast stone hall, telling Aiden he will decapitate him next time and commanding him to rise. Cecil visualizes a shadowy figure on a throne and another character with glowing red eyes. Then her own eyes glow with fury as she vows to crush Duke Delphine and everyone hiding behind him with her own hands. 1 week later, the day of the festival arrives at a grand castle bustling with activity. Cecil grips his belt and pulls his sword from its sheath. His fingers snap open the clasp on his belt pouch. Cecil walks determinedly down a cobbled street at dusk, holding his sheathed sword. Elena stares forward, her eyes wide with alarm as sweat beads on her face. Cecil stands with her arms crossed, looking surprised at the young man in the town square. She questions why he is really there, remarking that she never thought he would ask her to the festival. Elena crosses her arms with a knowing smirk, confronting the other person about their strange behavior. She states that she heard he did nothing but train all week. Cecil questions a fair-haired man on the street, her expression skeptical. He turns away annoyed, defensively asking what is so strange about him training, and then scoffs. She retorts that he never cared about anything like that before. A small, smiling chibi head of Elena appears above Cecil and reveals he told their father he was irritating and should hurry up and hand over his title, causing Cecil to recoil in shock and pain. Elena smiles brightly and laughs beside a grumpy-looking Cecil who carries his sword at his side. Cecil smiles with flushed cheeks, looking upwards as she speaks. Cecil looks intently to the side, his expression pensive as he falls into silent thought. Cecil looks thoughtfully to the side, his purple eyes focused on something unseen. Belinda instructs 2 guards to keep an eye on the young master, ordering them to prevent him from causing a fuss with so many visitors in town. A complex diagram reveals glowing, interconnected chessboards branching out into numerous timelines, some containing pieces while others remain empty to show unpredictable variables. Cecil's eyes glow blue as a purple aura envelops him. He holds a black chess piece poised over the chessboard while contemplating his next strategic move. Cecil firmly grips the dark pouch on his hip. Cecil accepts a loaf of bread from an old vendor at a nighttime market stall as a young man stands beside her. Cecil pulls a young woman by the hand, running urgently through the bustling twilight streets. A grand stone castle with multiple spires stands under a starry night sky as glowing particles float in the air. Cecil stands on the steps beside Elena, overlooking the quiet town at night as he considers how predictable the yearly events are and wishes for something new. Cecil's face shows concern as sweat beads on his temple. He internally questions why nothing has happened with the festivities almost over, wondering if his presence with Elena is the reason. Cecil stares forward with intense blue eyes, challenging them to go somewhere else. Elena sits on the steps with her chin in her hand, listening to an armored figure suggest a new event in another neighborhood, and she looks up with interest. Elena pulls an unseen person by the hand through a town street, shouting that she will blame them if it's not fun as a blonde man watches from a distance. Cecil's eye glows with light as he comes to a sudden realization. 2 armored men restrain Elena, pinning her against a glowing backdrop as she screams at them, calling them traitors. Jamal and Philip, 2 armored guard knights, carry a smiling young Elena on their shoulders, having protected her since she was a small child and becoming the most trusted individuals in the Perdium territory. In the past, they were said to have been killed while trying to protect Elena, but that story was incomplete. Cecil's determined expression intensifies, his blue eye focusing as he realizes it was the 2 of them. 2 men with glowing eyes restrain Elena, grinning as she struggles against their hold and screams, "You traitors." Elena and her party of adventurers rush down a cobblestone path into a town. Cecil and his companions stand on a cobblestone street, whipping their heads around to follow a swift, unseen movement that rushes past them. Cecil turns her head, looking around the dirty, abandoned area with a disgruntled expression as she questions who would perform there, while a knight beside her appears amused. 2 people argue in a town square about an upcoming event, one insisting a setup will begin soon while the other shouts that no one will perform there, as Cecil observes them silently. Cecil glares intensely to the side, his blue eyes narrowing as he understands the situation. Crates and makeshift barricades intentionally block all exits on a dark, abandoned street. Cecil pulls with a determined and strained expression, lurching forward from the force. Cecil forcefully drags a blonde man down a cobbled street, ignoring the protests from her knight. A flustered man asks Cecil if she works out and questions her strength, but she glares back at him with an annoyed expression. Cecil forcefully shoves Elena away, causing her to cry out in pain as she stumbles backward. Cecil stares forward, his eyes wide with terror and his face contorted in distress. Elena's eyes widen in distress and she flinches, stammering Philip's name. Elena and Cecil stare up with distressed expressions at the looming armored figure who demands to know what is wrong with them. Cecil looks down and scratches the back of his head, speaking apologetically. Cecil's eyes glow red and a wide, sinister grin spreads across his face as he claps his gloved hands together. Elena gasps in disbelief, her eyes wide with shock and terror at the suggestion. Cecil's foot lands on the cobblestone street as a small group of people watches him from the background. Cecil walks purposefully down a cobblestone street at dusk, flanked by 2 hooded individuals in his long coat and wide-brimmed hat. A man with a beard, round sunglasses, and a wide-brimmed hat speaks, confirming that Frank fulfilled his end of the deal as hooded figures stand silently in the background. Cecil, in full armor with an axe, shouts at the cloaked figures, confirming he brought Lady Elena as promised and demands to get the deal over with as she stands nearby with her escort. Cecil looks on with a thoughtful expression, recognizing the Count's son and questioning his unexpected presence in the deal. Elena shudders in fear, clutching tightly onto Cecil's shirt as he stands stoically beside her. The man in armor leans forward with a smirk, gesturing with an open palm as he internally scoffs that the fool walked right into his own grave. Cecil, a shorter armored man, and his tall cloaked companion confront a lone man in a cobblestone town square at dusk. Cecil flashes a wide, manic grin and tells the other person to worry about themselves, laughing as he suggests the two of them just run far away. A grand castle looms on a distant hill, casting its shadow over the humble town where the people barely scrape by and suffer constant barbarian attacks. Cecil stands with open palms and shrugs, a wide grin on his face. Cecil lunges forward, stabbing the armored warrior directly in the chest, but the warrior stands completely unfazed by the attack, a smug look on his face. Cecil's eyes widen in shock as blood drips from his mouth and splatters from an injury on his torso. Cecil, a rugged man, and a young girl all stare forward, their expressions frozen in wide-eyed shock and confusion. Cecil stands over two defeated figures, his sword impaling one of them to the ground as he accuses them of selling his group out. Cecil's eye glows with blue energy as electric sparks arc around it, his gaze fixed off-panel. Cecil grabs a struggling blonde-haired person by the arm, furiously yelling at Jamal for a night's loss against a weakling. Cecil's head is pierced from above by a large sword, splattering blood. Cecil's face contorts in pain and shock, blood splattering from his wide-open mouth as he lets out a choked gasp. Cecil stands protectively over a frightened Elena, his body emitting a faint blue aura as a glowing sword remains impaled in the fallen armored figure at their feet. Elena and Belinda stand cloaked at night, observing from a distance. Belinda stammers as she asks if they are truly watching Count Perdium's son, recalling that he was supposed to have no combat experience or training whatsoever. Elena considers the man's appearance, thinking to herself that even if the knights were caught off guard, he still took down two of them in seconds. Cecil gestures confidently with open hands as his mana-infused sword is impaled into the ground, glowing next to a shocked and bloodied face. A distressed girl with tears streaming down her face clings to Cecil's back, sobbing as she asks him what is going on. Cecil stands in profile against the stone buildings, his gaze fixed on something off-panel. Elena reels back as a hand strikes her forcefully across the face, her eyes wide with shock. Cecil kneels and gently lays a small, unconscious girl on the ground, telling her to rest for a moment. Cecil looks forward with a subtle, confident expression as an unseen voice thanks him. Cecil stands over the unconscious Elena and Belinda, surrounded by the bodies of defeated soldiers. Three cloaked figures walk toward him across the plaza. One of them tells Cecil he is different from what they were told, adding that they were going to kill the two women themselves. Cecil smirks knowingly with a pipe held in his mouth, his face partially hidden by sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. He asks the cloaked figures if they have been hiding their abilities, clacking the pipe against his teeth. Cecil turns his back and slides the blood-stained sword into its scabbard, leaving spatters of blood on the cobblestone ground. Cecil swings his sword, his thoughts focused on the three enemies. Three cloaked figures walk forward, radiating a powerful blue mana. The central figure, an older man in a hat, smokes a cigarette while his energy far surpasses the two flanking him. Cecil gathers crackling blue energy around himself, holding his sword ready while extending his other hand forward as he resolves to keep the fight short. Cecil stands on a cobblestone street at night with his sword drawn, facing a man in a long coat flanked by two shadowy figures who tells him he is going to die any minute. Cecil speaks, a subtle glow surrounding his head as the view closes in on his mouth. Cecil's eyes glow a bright blue as he holds his unique, glowing weapon, a powerful blue aura emanating from his body as he stares forward with a determined expression. Elena, cloaked and hooded, draws her dagger and asks if she should kill their target. Cecil, his back turned, orders her not to. He commands her to keep the man alive but to mutilate him, intending to make his father go insane with grief. Cecil smirks under his hat and sunglasses, declaring that the more pain they feel, the more exquisite their corpses will look. Cecil stands with his back to the viewer, facing three armed opponents. Two of the men charge forward with swords raised. The third figure, a man in a hat, acknowledges a command with a shout. Cecil glares forward, his eyes glowing white as he crushes a small object in his hand, shattering it into pieces. A hooded figure tosses a cylindrical object directly at Cecil, who stands in the cobblestone square with his sword drawn and ready. Cecil lunges forward and deflects the object with a glowing blue implement, flinching with a startled expression as he realizes it is a firecracker. A blade slices across Cecil's face, spraying blood as his expression contorts with shock and pain. Cecil drives his fist through the masked opponent's torso, the impact releasing a massive explosion of energy. Cecil strikes down a cloaked assailant with his sword, shouting at them to stop playing dirty tricks as another cloaked figure lunges to attack him. Cecil parries an energized strike from a masked opponent, their swords clashing on the cobblestone street. Cecil snaps her head around, her blue eye glowing with an intense light. Cecil swings his sword, striking the hooded, masked opponent who recoils from the blow. Cecil raises his sword to defend against a magical energy attack launched by a masked assailant. Cecil swings his glowing sword, cutting into the shadowy, cloaked opponent and causing blood to splatter from the strike. Cecil's intense blue eyes widen as he sharply reacts to something moving at high speed past his head. Cecil delivers a powerful downward strike onto the head of another character. Cecil turns, crossing her two swords to deflect a sudden attack from an unseen assailant's blade. Cecil looks on in shock with a pipe in his mouth, questioning how his perfectly concealed attack could have possibly been blocked. Cecil spins with his dual swords, striking his opponent and forcing the man to stagger backward from the attack. Cecil lunges forward through the pouring rain, slashing his glowing blue sword down at his staggered opponent. A bright energy slash violently strikes Elena across the neck, causing blood to splatter from the impact. The dark smoking pipe shatters, its broken pieces falling onto the stone ground. Cecil flinches, his eyes wide with shock as a glowing purple energy blade sweeps past his face. Elena unleashes a rapid flurry of sword strikes against Cecil, who parries each attack with his own blade in a swift exchange. Cecil clutches his neck, sweat dripping from his face as blue mana emanates from a wound on his throat. Cecil grits his teeth in frustration, realizing his opponent blocked the neck slash with mana and negated most of the damage. Cecil grips his sword as a vibrant blue energy glows from his hands. Cecil grins widely under his hat and sunglasses. A scar visible on his neck as glowing energy surrounds him. He declares his opponent will die here regardless. Cecil grins with a visible injury on his neck, surrounded by blue magical energy as he remarks that the attack nearly took his head off. Cecil tightens his grip on his sword as the blade emanates a bright blue energy. Elena unleashes a burst of blue mana, sending Cecil flying backwards as he shouts that she cannot beat him with that amount of mana. Cecil's face is surrounded by crackling blue and purple energy, one eye glowing intensely blue from behind his sunglasses as he screams that his opponent will die regardless. Cecil grins, his face partially hidden behind two glowing blue swords crossed in front of him. Cecil's glowing eye stares intensely over his dark glasses, a subtle smirk on his lips as a powerful aura radiates from him. Cecil parries his opponent's swift sword strike. The gray-haired character strikes Cecil with a glowing sword, causing him to recoil from the impact as blood splatters from the wound. Cecil lunges forward and launches an energy projectile, striking a cloaked figure and sending them skidding backward on the cobblestone street. Cecil smirks confidently, telling his opponent they can't beat him, but he is cut off mid-sentence as his face becomes severely injured and bleeds, red energy pulsing from the wounds. Cecil collapses to his knees, bleeding from the mouth as his glowing blue sword lies on the ground beside him. Cecil staggers back, bloodied and scratched across the face, gripping his clothes in panicked disbelief as he realizes the attack's force has inexplicably increased and shattered his mana shield. Cecil kneels injured on the ground before a figure with glowing legs, his sword dropped as he confesses he didn't know someone else had killed Elena. Cecil strides forward with a stern expression, his body surrounded by crackling dark purple energy as he holds a sword at his side. Cecil's eyes glow with rage as he releases his third core, a powerful pink energy radiating outward from his chest. Cecil's mouth hangs open in shock as he shouts, demanding to know how his opponent amplified their mana by such a large amount. Cecil leaps into the air with glowing eyes, raising two blades as he dives down towards his opponent. The older man with long hair and round glasses widens his eyes in surprise, one lens revealing a diamond-shaped pupil as he reacts to his opponent's speed. Cecil and Elena duel on the cobblestone street, their swords clashing in a rapid exchange of strikes and parries. Cecil swings his weapon in a powerful arc, his face set with an intense expression. Cecil attacks Elena, their swords clashing together as she blocks his strike. Cecil struggles to block the attack with his sword, his face contorting in pain as his hands throb from the sheer force of the blow. Cecil's gloved hand tightens on his sword as the blade fractures with visible cracks, unable to withstand the immense force pressing against it. The cloaked, eye-patch-wearing Elena brings her sword down on Cecil, who recoils from the powerful blow and shouts that he has never heard of a technique that amplifies power so drastically. Cecil grips his sword in a fierce stance, his eyes glowing purple with intensity. A potent red and pink aura erupts from his body, signifying a complete transformation. Cecil strikes forward with a crystalline weapon marked with an eye, impacting her opponent amidst a burst of pink energy and shattering debris. Cecil swings his sword and strikes the masked figure, sending a spray of blood and fragments into the air from the impact. Cecil is struck across the chest and neck, blood splattering from the wound. Cecil glares with fierce eyes, gritting his teeth as he rapidly swings his fencing sword. Cecil plunges his weapon into his opponent's chest, causing a splash of blood. Cecil screams in agony, blood splattered across his glasses and face. Cecil receives a violent punch directly to his face, causing blood to splatter from the impact. Cecil stands confidently amid debris and blood over two defeated figures, one armored and one civilian. They lie on the cobblestone street as he asks if they shall continue where they left off. Cecil stabs a disfigured, long-haired man in a stone chamber, and the man grabs his arm as Cecil demands to know who hired him. Cecil lunges, his injured and blood-covered hand reaching out to grasp the flying dagger. Cecil grapples with a blood-soaked assailant who turns to strike Elena as she lies injured on the ground. Cecil hurls a glowing, sharp projectile from his gloved hand, screaming for his target to die. Cecil grips the blade with a hand wreathed in glowing red energy and forcefully pulls the weapon free from the surface. A bloodied Cecil punches his distressed older opponent, his fist glowing with red energy as the man holds a blade. He screams, "How about a deal?" while landing the hit. Cecil glares intensely, pink energy flaring around his eye as he demands his opponent stop playing tricks and answer his question, offering to withdraw his sword in return for the information. Elena stares in shock with blood dripping from his mouth, completely immobilized as glowing pink mana strings bind his fist and body. Cecil stands with his hand outstretched, engulfed by a dark, swirling aura as luminous energy lines flow across his form. Cecil clenches his fist as fresh blood drips from a wound on his torso. Cecil, splattered with blood, shows a determined expression as he delivers a powerful glowing strike that erupts in a bright flash amidst swirling red energy. Cecil screams in shock, blood splattering from his mouth. Cecil, splattered with blood, drives his slender weapon into the chest of the man with the eye patch, creating a bright, glowing impact. Cecil screams in agony, his injured body enveloped by crackling energy against a fiery background. The orb of Cecil's mana cracks and shatters, its blue energy dissipating into glowing fragments and particles against the fiery background. Cecil plunges her hand into the man's chest, causing a violent reflux of glowing mana energy to erupt from the wound. Cecil smirks confidently, his eyes glowing a vibrant blue as pink and red energy swirls around him. He states that the limitation only applies to the unskilled and that he can make it work. Cecil screams in agony as glowing golden cracks spread across his face and body, shouting that his opponent was not bluffing. Cecil's eye glows intensely with a swirling red and pink aura, a purple skull symbol forming within his pupil as he accepts he is about to die. The bloodied and distressed elderly man screams that it was Count Desmond. Cecil drives a blade through the chest of a bloodied man who gasps out a final confession. He reveals Count Desmond hired them to create an excuse for House Perdium and House Diegald to go to war. Cecil looks up with a determined expression, blood staining his collar as he realizes Count Desmond was responsible. Cecil stands among other cloaked figures in a dark forest, pointing an accusing finger as she recalls Duke Delphine's past tactic of using lesser houses for his dirty work and silently calls him a sly bastard for hiding. Cecil, bloodied and wearing an eye patch, grimaces in pain while Belinda confronts him. She accuses him of being tasked to kill Elena, and he pants heavily, confirming that she is right. Cecil stabs the older man in the chest, sending blood splattering from the wound. Cecil, severely wounded and covered in blood, screams in agony, questioning what his attacker is doing and trying to mention a promise before he chokes and gags. Blood-splattered Cecil smirks confidently and asks his opponent if they now fear death when it is their turn, reminding them they spent a lifetime killing others before scoffing. Cecil lets out a sinister laugh, his intense blue eye dominating his expression. Cecil holds his bloodied opponent under the rein as the man screams defiantly. He shouts that killing him changes nothing because House Diegald already has a reason for war, taunting that no one would believe a good-for-nothing like Cecil. Elena is violently struck across the face, her head whipping sideways from the impact as blood spills from her mouth. Cecil, covered in blood, forcefully grabs the face of the injured blue-haired character as a red, smoky aura surrounds them. Cecil grins defiantly, his face streaked with blood. He recalls having died once before and returned to life, convinced that the outcome will be different this time. Cecil screams in intense pain as crimson and purple energy radiates from his hands and lower arms. A pillar of purple light erupts from the center of a medieval town, shooting straight up into the dark night sky. Cecil stands bloodied on the stone ground, holding two glowing purple swords and facing a massive purple energy explosion erupting above a damaged building. Two armored figures lie defeated and bloodied on the cobblestone street. Cecil lies prone on the cobblestone street, bleeding heavily in his armor as his mouth hangs open, gasping for air. Cecil, covered in blood and sweat, grimaces with determination as he turns his head to the side, his blue eyes glowing intensely. Elena lies unconscious on the ground. Cecil stands in the destroyed street, covered in blood and holding a bloody sword. Blood also splatters the building behind him. A bloodied, ornate sword slams into the patterned ground, cracking the surface around its tip. Cecil, covered in sweat and bloodstains, looks upwards with his eyes closed and exhales in relief. Cecil's face is shown bruised and bleeding, his expression contorted in agony as a throbbing pain shoots through his head. A white light envelops everything. Cecil collapses to his hands and knees on the stone street, severely injured and covered in blood while his sword lies on the ground beside him. Cecil leans against a stone wall and wipes blood from his mouth, his expression distraught as he struggles with a power that was once easy for him to command. Cecil refuses to pass out and forces himself forward, rushing with great speed toward a stone building. Cecil, injured, bursts through a shattered doorway into a blood-splattered room, finding two motionless figures lying on the floor among the debris. Cecil stands bloodied and distraught over Elena's lifeless, blood-soaked body inside a brick room. He pants heavily, remembering his past life when other corpses were discovered alongside hers. Cecil stands with his back turned, staring at an ornate crest on the wall featuring a black eagle on a gold shield. Count Diggle's son slumps forward, covered in blood and severe injuries. Cecil sits in the rubble, touching a blood-stained body bag. He realizes the man and his guard knight were killed and framed for Elena's death. A tattered black flag with a white wolf emblem waves over a desolate, burning battlefield under a dark, cloudy sky. Cecil, splattered with blood, pulls a small object from a pouch on his hip. A bloodied Cecil carries an unconscious Elena on his back, walking with grim determination through the burning village littered with the bodies of fallen enemies. A hooded Cecil perches high above the town, watching Elena walk through the streets illuminated by a red, fiery glow. Elena dashes through the cobblestone streets under a red sky. A message reports that the assassins sent to Perdium failed. A robed figure shouts across a circular table at another named Murmur, questioning how they failed to kill one girl. The figure points out that Frank, the strongest intelligence agent, was sent and the guard knights were bribed. He accuses Murmur of underestimating the job as the other robed figures at the table murmur amongst themselves. Cecil kneels on the desolate surface with his head bowed, his expression shifting to one of distress as a devastating realization strikes him. Elena grimaces with intense fury from beneath her hood, her brows furrowed and her teeth clenched tight. Elena and Belinda sit at a table with a third person in a dimly lit room as Belinda clenches her fist on the table, asking if they mean Cecil, who she calls a lost cause. A man's face, obscured by shadow, twists in fury as he shouts. A strong blue light radiates from his open hand. Cecil stares forward from under her hood, her eyes glowing white as sweat beads on her face. She swallows hard, distressed by the memory that he was completely different from what they knew. Cecil undergoes a violent transformation while fighting, a skull glowing in his eye as he unleashes destructive fire that incinerates his foes and the surroundings. Then he carries an unconscious person and walks away. Cecil kneels before two shadowy figures and pleads for another chance, explaining he has provided House Perdium with the justification to start a territory war with House Degalt. An unseen voice screams for silence, questioning how an intelligence unit could fail to gather information on a single person and berating them for the time wasted. The voice furiously denies a request for another chance, calling the initial task a simple one. Two angry, shadowy figures loom over a slumped, glowing blue figure on the ground as a voice commands them to get rid of him. The command silence manifests within a glowing red aura, silencing the scene. Cecil stands cloaked with his back turned, looking down into a dark chamber where a large, glowing window illuminates a small, indistinct figure, causing him to react in shock. Cecil looks down from the shadows, his face illuminated by a red and magenta glow as he questions the desire for a second chance. Cecil grimaces in a fit of desperate rage, screaming that he will destroy Cecil Perdium. An unseen character questions how this is possible and declares they will have him taken down in a duel. Cecil's glowing white eyes shine from under his hood, his masked face set in a determined grimace as he declares he knows the perfect candidate. Cecil stands in a dim, ornate room, his hand placed on his chin in contemplation as another shadowy figure stands in the background. Cain Loges stands with a muscular build, holding his sword over a pile of broken and bloody weapons. He is known for his overwhelming strength and massive build, and no one in the north is able to best his sword. A hooded figure declares with a determined expression that since Cain is Cecil's cousin, orchestrating their encounter will be a simple matter. Cecil stands with his back turned, clenching his fist as he confronts two shadowy figures seated at a table in an ornate room. Cecil's silhouetted figure radiates a dark aura, his form outlined in glowing red and purple energy. Cecil's eye glows intensely, its pupil burning with a fiery light as he delivers a final threat. A voice makes a determined vow not to disappoint. The Perdium Castle Training Hall, a stone building with a large tower, stands at the base of a mountain. An old man in full plate armor stands in a stone corridor, gesturing with one hand as he announces a meal is ready for the young master. A burst of blue energy radiates outward from a bright white center. Cecil recoils in bewilderment as a brilliant blue energy beam deflects forcefully off a large sword blade. Cecil stands defensively in the stone corridor as an X-shaped energy projectile rushes directly towards him. Cecil firmly grips the hilt of his sword as it begins to glow with power. Cecil confidently swings two glowing swords within the large stone chamber. Cecil looks forward with a confused expression, his blue eyes fixed on something unseen. Cecil stands in the training hall with his sword and sees Old Man Fergus bowing deeply. He stammers an apology, realizing he interrupted the man's training. Cecil stares with wide eyes, completely surprised as he asks how the feat was just accomplished. Cecil gestures with his hand, confidently levitating a glowing blue sword within the stone chamber. Cecil's hand manipulates glowing blue mana, forming it into string-like threads as he explains. This is a mana thread, a way of using mana by shaping it into string form. Cecil concentrates and unleashes a technique from his past life, knowing he isn't strong enough to use it well unless he makes a mana core erupt. Glowing energy strings shoot forward to impact an older man as a ghostly figure manifests behind him. Cecil's eyes glow blue as a powerful aura surrounds his sword hilt. He manipulates a single, thin thread of mana between his fingers, realizing he can use the technique with his current capacity by minimizing the mana cost to one strand. Cecil looks down at the glowing magic on his chest with a shocked expression, thinking he has never seen mana like this during his long career as a knight. Elena looks down, questioning how he could use mana like thread when he had no training and couldn't use mana until recently. He speaks from within a grand stone hall, the room empty with arched windows and a balcony. Cecil looks forward with a serious expression, questioning why he is being thanked. The large, armored knight Cecil bows his head slightly, thanking the man for protecting Lady Elena. Cecil turns his back and looks slightly down, telling them not to thank him because he only did what anyone would have. A multi-turreted castle stands against a clear sky as a voice says it is time to go eat. The festival is now cancelled and the grounds are completely deserted. The event was shut down after guard knights attempted to sell the count's daughter, which escalated into a serious issue. Cecil sits at a wooden table, tapping her fingers with a pout. She complains that everyone thinks she is lying when she tells them she was saved. Cecil sits at a table with Elena and Belinda, speaking directly to Elena. He tells her to go talk to the others but immediately takes it back, insisting they will not believe him anyway. Elena listens to his words while Belinda stares off, uninvolved in the discussion. Cecil gestures angrily while questioning Belinda about Jamal and Philip's intentions. Belinda rests her head on her hand at the table, looking weary and exhausted. Cecil sits at a wooden table, smiling at two obscured figures as a message announces that Elena survived. Cecil sits in an ornate chair, looking out a large, gridded window from inside a lavish room. He thinks about how he stopped the territorial war for now, but he is sure his enemies will continue to target House Perdium. Cecil's eyes narrow with resolve as he decides he cannot stop his enemies alone forever and must gather his own force. A maid pushes a serving cart into the dining room, announcing her presence. Cecil and Elena sit at a long table with other guests as a knight stands guard by the entrance. Cecil sits at a dining table while a servant places a covered dish before him, his thoughts focused on the household's finances. A single slice of bread rests on a white plate on a wooden table. Cecil glares forward, his eyes glowing with a vibrant blue light. Cecil stares intensely at the smiling Belinda, questioning why she is serving a dessert their territory cannot afford. Cecil slumps over the large wooden table, overwhelmed by the roaring demands for compensation. An angry bearded man cups his hand to his mouth, shouting his demand for compensation from House Perdium for the losses incurred by cutting the festival short. An angry mob armed with tools storms up a stone staircase toward a barred gate, shouting demands for compensation. A group of angry commoners gathers outside a prison cell, confronting the person inside. One man points an accusatory finger, shouting for the person in charge to come out and accusing the rich of ignoring the common people, while an official nervously pleads for the crowd to settle down. Cecil looks out the window with a panicked and shocked expression, reacting to the commotion from the crowd below. Belinda speaks to Cecil with tears in her eyes and an anxious expression, telling him she thought this might happen. Cecil looks back at her, his expression questioning and confused. Belinda clutches her chest in pain, sweating as she explains that the territory's merchants rely on festival tourism to make their money. A crowd of enraged men holds up farming tools, shouting with furious and determined expressions. Cecil's eyes are wide with distress, his brows furrowed as sweat trickles down his face. Cecil looks worried with sweat beading on his temple, considering how the merchants are about to become violent. Cecil points towards a grated window, shouting a command for Old Man Fergus to send the soldiers out to keep the peace while Elena and Belinda stand beside him. The older man in blue armor closes his eyes and calmly states that they have none, prompting Cecil to look up in shocked disbelief and question what he just said. Cecil watches in frustration as orcs fight the human soldiers, realizing most of the troops are away rebuilding the post by the monster forest after a previous attack. Barbarians to the north keep the soldiers of Perdium in a state of constant war, and a forest to the east threatens monster attacks at any moment. Cecil looks intensely frustrated, clicking his tongue as he thinks about the shortage of money and soldiers, finding the situation ridiculous. Cecil grabs Belinda by the arm and forcefully pulls her away, telling her he needs a word. Belinda looks back confused while Elena watches the scene with a shocked expression. Cecil looks at Belinda with a serious expression and tells her to use his allowance, which she manages, to calm the merchants for now. Belinda stares forward with an unsettling, mischievous smile, laughing as she taunts Cecil for not having any allowance. Belinda smiles teasingly at Cecil, reminding him how his lordship cut him off for wasting money. Cecil realizes he has absolutely no money at his disposal, not even a single coin. Cecil demands money from Belinda, shouting that he has none, but she simply smiles and denies his request. Cecil sits on a castle windowsill, looking out over his rural territory with its small village and mountains. He internally curses his lack of money and soldiers, questioning what this land even has. Cecil looks down, realizing his knowledge of the future is useless without capital, and resolves to secure funds first. Cecil sprints through the hallway, frantically questioning what he can do and trying to remember if they owned anything valuable. A man bursts frantically through a doorway shouting for the young master, and Cecil turns toward the commotion with a surprised expression. Cecil climbs through an open window and looks down at an armored man gasping for air on the floor, asking him what is wrong. Cecil screams in terror, his eyes wide and frantic with sweat dripping down his face as he shouts that the situation is bad because young Master Kane is looking for him. Cecil stares forward, his eyes widening with surprise and concern as he calls out Kane's name. Cecil wobbles on his feet, bleeding from his face and gasping for breath as he struggles to remain upright. Cecil's fist smashes into his opponent's face, causing blood to spray from the violent impact. Cecil's blood-splattered muscled fist descends with immense speed. A glowing fist smashes into Cecil's face, the impact deforming his cheek and sending blood spraying from his mouth as his head snaps back. Cecil takes a glowing purple blow to his chest, the impact cracking his bones as he coughs up blood. Cecil stands over the defeated, heavily armored figure, holding his sword as the bloodied opponent lies on the ground. A gravely injured and bloodied man lies on the ground, panting and coughing as he struggles to call out for his young master. Cecil stares forward with wide, intensely focused blue eyes, his light hair disheveled. Cecil's intense blue eye is wide and focused. Cecil's massive, muscular figure looms over Elena, casting her small form in a dark shadow against the fiery red background. Cecil stares directly forward with glowing yellow eyes and a confident smirk, greeting his cousin.